I'm assuming the audio is good. So I'll just kind of go from there. I'm going to talk about Playwright tonight, and I'll just seed. I know when you start, and just go straight into details without an example. Sometimes, content's a little bit less easy to get hooked on. So just a quick example here is I'm just gonna go to Google. If I wanted to go to Google, see that I can search for a famous hockey player and get the first image. Okay, so you should be good with that, I'm assuming. Yeah. All right, yeah. So to kind of show you Playwright, it'll automatically do end-to-end testing as you create end-to-end tests. I'll get into like sort of what that is, etc. But if I just run a test, we're going to quickly go to Google, look up a famous hockey player and see that there's at least one image there and it passed. And that's like kind of quick. They say it's pretty performant. I'm far from an expert in Playwright. I've been using it for about like 3, 4 weeks. But that took 6 seconds. If you don't actually want to see the browser go through it, so you're just running it on CI/CD, it'll cut the time into roughly half. So that's just like kind of a quick demo. We're going to get into other demos and I'll go into the presentation now. And yuck. And it's F12 to start the slides. Nope, that's wrong. Um, does anybody remember the hotkey for Chrome slide or Google slides?
On the far right, there's a drop down.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's it. That's what I was missing. All right, awesome. So yeah, I'm Frank Visaggio. I work at General Atomics. We do like a lot of geospatial information and tracking all over the globe. So that's the Panama Canal, seeing like sort of different ships over time, where they're coming from the countries. And like that was for some research with how climate change affects the Panama Canal. I wouldn't be surprised if water levels has something to do with shipping, but I'm not a shipping expert. So let's talk a little bit about Playwright. Just as an overview, it's open source. It initially came from Puppeteer. I think they forked Puppeteer, and it does like end-to-end testing of your different web applications. The cool thing is like you can sort of run your tests on like Chrome, Firefox, Edge, right out of the box with a lot of different integrations. And it's really used for like say end-to-end testing or integration testing as opposed to unit testing. So like if you want to an example of both of them, like a unit test would be like, let's say I have an e-commerce site and I'm selling stuff, from like I'm selling ski gear. A unit test might be, let's say I have a function and I want to add a VAT tax because you're in a country not as great as America and they charge you a VAT tax, flat 19%. A unit test to make sure I'm correctly adding the 19% to that. That's a unit test. Or like I think of like end-to-end or integration tests of like, maybe log into the website, add something to your cart, see that it's in the cart, be able to check out, etc. Or, another thing like an integration test is, let's say you have a chat component to talk to customer service. It's really an AI bot. Maybe I just take that little chat box rather than spin up the whole website, wait for everything there, click into it. You would just spin it up in Storybook and sort of, go into that chat box, see if I type something, does it show that there's someone else in the chat who's thinking? Does it show the ... when they're typing back, etc.? So that's really integration and end-to-end tests is sort of where Playwright shines and its use case, if you will. So at a high level, I always like to think about like, what are some goals and what are a little bit better goals if you can. So too often, we think about code coverage. We want X% code coverage. A awesome idea that was, I think, shared by the Web Syntax YouTube channel was sort of code assurance. And that's kind of like the thought of like, if I have X number of paths through my system, how many of those user paths am I covering rather than just total number of lines? Because think about it, if you have an About Us page, and let's say that About Us page is 2,000 lines of code, do you really need to have 100% coverage on that About Us page? Probably not. But like, let's say a user can add something to their cart, add multiple items to their cart, then change the numbers in their cart, and then still check out. Making sure they can do that and they're getting billed the right price, that's probably way more essential than every single line of code, especially if every single line of code isn't as essential. However, if you do care about code coverage, it is theoretically possible. There's a library called Istanbul where you can sort of see like the different lines that Jest or other testing engines touch in your JavaScript code. You can hook Playwright into Storybook and get those sort of metrics. So you can see the number of lines that you test for code coverage to consume that with Playwright. That's in theory. A really awesome architect on my team, Matt, is pretty close to solving that. It should be possible. I don't really know enough about it until I actually see how he did it, but seems like that's absolutely possible if your organization really cares about the actual code coverage percentage. So yeah, let's go on. So just as a high level, like for an overview, you can run different tests on different browsers, which is pretty neat. Now, one gotcha is you can only really use the latest version of a browser. So if you want to test in Firefox 36, Firefox 70, use Selenium. Don't use Playwright. You're gonna have a bad time. But this is sort of showing the config how you would set up different browsers, and you can also do like mobile versions of Safari, etc., and specify that, if you will. At a high level, what does the architecture look like? It's going to communicate directly with the browser on the machines or wherever it's running through with WebSockets. And it's apparently like, and I say apparently because like a lot of this information is from the Playwright site or from the people who work on it, but like they say that it's way, it's faster, more performant than maybe some of their competitors, especially with headless mode testing. And one of the benefits is the fact that it's really optimized to be parallelized. So if you have 1,000 tests, you're not just going to wait for one to go then the other. It's going to run a whole bunch of them in parallel, which helps it be faster. And then for debugging, a lot of times it's too fast. So when I showed you that browser where it took 6 seconds, it's purposely adding waits in there so you can actually follow it go through. Otherwise, it would be almost impossible to follow depending on your tests, if you will. So the fact that it has to throttle itself for you to like visually debug and figure out what's happening where possibly shows you how performant it is. Mind you, I'm not an expert in Cypress or Selenium, so I can't really give you an apples to apples. We had a talk a couple months ago about Cypress, maybe it's more than a couple months, and that was pretty performant too. So investigate it for yourself in regards to the true performance, if you will. So let me just sort of get rid of that. Sorry about that. Yeah, so about the API, they have an interface for controlling different browsers. So like some of the actions that you can do, you can navigate to different pages. You can click on all sorts of elements, check boxes, fill out forms, see if something's selected. And you're not going to have to do anything different, whether you're testing on like mobile, Safari, Edge, or Firefox, etc. Another thing to be familiar with is there's different browser contexts. So they're sort of like isolated environments. This allows things to run in parallel because you don't really have any dependencies. Like it has its own cache, cookies, and storage. Now, in order to not screw this up or to do it correctly, what you need to be aware of is that tests should be isolated. So if you have sort of a setup thing, you don't want to have tests where it's like, all right, test 2 depends on test 1. Each test is going to run isolated in parallel. So like if there's something that needs to happen in a setup, you would use a setup function, etc. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then sort of the server communicates between the client and the different browser contexts. So technically, when you're testing, whether it's locally or from CI/CD or in one of the cloud solutions, that would facilitate spinning up, Firefox, Chrome, etc., all at the same time and running that, or maybe you only care about one browser. Similar, maybe kind of similar to how like the Selenium grid concept works. So to continue on, the way that it works, it's really just like a 3/4 step process. Initially, you'll have the client, it'll connect to that server, and then that server figures out the different browsers that it needs, and it'll create those contexts. It then will run your test scripts. And then as it's doing that, it'll do different things, especially if it fails, it'll like take videos, screenshots, etc. It'll send those back to the client, and then you can go into debug mode, which I'll show you, and sort of process that. And then there's teardowns where In theory, now mind you, I say in theory because I don't have enough continued experience to know if you could screw this up, the browser context will be gone, there'll be no memory leaks, etc. I don't know if you actually, if there's ways in which you can misuse it and have the teardown not successfully complete. I haven't really hammered away at it enough to see if that's possible, but that's how it should work. I'm sure with bad code, you can break anything. Yeah, and then some other cool advanced features is sort of like modifying network requests. So like you can simulate different like network failures, throttle different things, and modifying response data. So like if you need to have different like headers or you have different responses depending on what your privileged access are, you can kind of intercept that and modify it. And then when I showed you before, when I showed you how it took 6 seconds for it to go through Chrome where you could follow it versus 3 seconds without seeing the browser, that was in headless mode. So that's really great for CI/CD continuous integration where you don't necessarily need that visual feedback. And it's way faster, if you will. And then I will show the sort of the tracing and the debugging, which is really awesome. And one of the reasons that this is neat is because like, let's say you have 1,000 Playwright tests, right? Or 10,000. You're not going to have time to run them on every commit, every change. They're going to run CI/CD, hopefully, maybe in the middle of the night. And then the next day you'll see what failed. If two things failed, this debugging trace will show you sort of screenshots. You'll see where it got stuck. And it even has a context where you can kind of click around and see like, oh, look, that test ID was rather than chat window, it was chat bot context instead. We changed it and that's why it didn't find it. So some really awesome stuff to sort of recover from broken tests and see why tests failed, if you will. So yeah, as I mentioned, Playwright supports all the browsers, modern web support. Microsoft's the maintainer of it. And the reason that it goes pretty fast is due to, the parallel nature. If you want to do old browsers, I think Selenium is the only game in town for this. And WebDriver is an open standard, if you will. So like by default, as browsers add new things to the browsers, it should be supported by WebDriver. So that's maybe another positive for Selenium. And like Cypress, great developer experience. I don't know if it's still Chrome only. Does anybody know if Cypress supports like Edge and other things? Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I don't really. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, maybe I didn't see that. Yeah. Oh, true. Good point. I guess like IE and Safari then.
Cypress is Chromium.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, neat. But yeah, I don't really know enough about Cypress. Cypress looks pretty performant. But if you look at and this is probably not the best way to pick things too. If you look at like resume trends and like Stack Overflow's state of the developer surveys, Playwright does have a lot of support and like a good ramp up of stars on GitHub. So it seems like there's a lot of developer satisfaction. I did not do an exhaustive list there in regards to Playwright versus the others. So just some things to sort of, think about at a high level when you're writing your different tests in Playwright, and we'll see some of this too, is, because things are going to happen in parallel, you absolutely, cannot have things commingled in regards to dependencies. So like if you need to log in with a certain token or something, you wouldn't want to put that in one test and then have the second test call the first test, etc. You do that in like sort of a setup. Another thing to realize is, and this is something that like Playwright talks about how great they are, but mind you, when they talk about this, these are people on the Playwright team. So like, there might be some bias there, maybe there's not, but like one cool thing about Playwright is it has automatic waiting, if you will. You don't have to do like sleep 300 milliseconds, sleep 800 milliseconds. And the key is to use that. And like there's sort of different things. And I'll show you one test that I had failing and that I tried to fix it with that. And it's like you want to wait until something's visible, but it will add that automatic waiting rather than you having to guess. So like if you're on a slower network, a faster network, all of that's off, or you have to configure that. So that's pretty neat. When you're trying to figure out why something's not working, definitely use the debugging view, if you will. And then a neat thing too is in regards to scaling, as your test suite gets bigger. I personally haven't got there yet, but like Azure sort of has like remote browsers where, I think of it kind of like the Selenium grid of like you could sort of in Azure have multiple tiers of different browsers for them to run those tests in parallel rather than on just like one machine, etc. I didn't find a similar service. Mind you, this is not generally available. It's like beta, or I forgot what Microsoft calls it. Preview. Yeah, it's a preview feature. There's like a third party one in AWS. No clue how long this will be, how long either one will be around. But the fact that Microsoft sort of maintains Playwright, I would think that this service and preview will probably be around to stay, but who knows? So let's just, take a high level of the syntax and sort of what it looks like. So with Playwright tests, to go to, you would have a page. And then if you want to go to a page, what's your URL? And then similar assertions like, expect. So I expect that page to have a title of X, Y, and Z, sort of a substring. And then when you organize your different tests, sort of to name them, like what are they doing? So like this one, we want to make sure that it has a title. My apologies for the font size and the positioning for the people in the back. I don't know if the monitor on the side still works. And then for this second one, sort of like, okay, so like if we want to click on a link in the get started link, there's many different locators, and I'll show you some of the different locators on how to find things. But here we're going to get by a role. So we want to find something that's a hyperlink, and then the name should be get started. So we find something. So like if this was a div, if this was a span, if this was a button that said get started, it would not be successful. And then once we see that link get started, we click on it. And then what we're going to expect here is that there should be a heading that should say installation. And then if you see that, our assertion sort of is we want it to be visible, if you will. And then the fact that it has those auto awaits, if you will, and it automatically waits until things are visible. So like, for example, the second you go to this page, I almost guarantee you in 1 or 2 milliseconds, that link's not going to be rendered yet. It's automatically awaiting. So that's why we sort of have these awaits before the different actions to await for them to be visible, to let Playwright do its sort of magic there, if you will. So it's kind of neat that you're not like messing with all sorts of sleeps to make sure things are visible, because those can really be a pain.
Then were you saying on that one that a click,
Yeah.
that it's waiting between the click and the page get by role?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And think about it, right? I mean, like, if it didn't, right, this isn't going to come up in a half millisecond or 1 millisecond. I'm sure it's more than 20 milliseconds. So if it's faster, like there could be a race condition, if you will. So yeah. And yeah, we'll get there when I show VS Code, but like what I really like is like if you know not a ton about Playwright, there's sort of a debugger where you can kind of see, like, click around on different pages and it'll roughly show you what you would have, like what the code version is to do that. And I think it's really cool how it does that. And we'll see a visual example. And then one thing that I like to champion is sort of like, okay, like end-to-end tests are really neat, or sometimes people find them neat, but consider smaller integration tests, right? So like if you have a gigantic application, I think of like maybe Amazon or like the web version of Microsoft Excel. If you just want to see how I change my login account on the top right of Excel, I don't need to run all of Excel, render everything, go up there and click it. I could probably just have that username in its own storybook in isolation and then just test against that. So like if you can sort of isolate different things to storybook and then use Playwright, that may, number one, it'll be more performant. Number two, it'll probably be easier to get started. Number three, ideally, the test will be less complicated and easier to maintain. Mind you, I say in theory, because I've been messing with Playwright for like less than 4 weeks. Once I live with it longer, I'll kind of have a better state of if that is good advice, but I believe that it probably will be tactical advice. Yeah.
Got a Zoom question. What
Sure.
is Storybook?
That's a great question. When we eventually, I did a presentation on Storybook, I think here, couple months back. Storybook's like sort of a way to isolate different web components and to host them and to interact with them. So like as a developer, you could, let's say I have a, let me think of something really simple, a speedometer, right? And the speedometer can do miles and kilometers. You would sort of use that to render just the speedometer component to sort of see the difference between the two. And actually, that's probably a terrible example. So if I just go to Storybook examples. Yeah.
It just helps them decide how you want it to.
Yeah, and so like, here's a, is this? So like, if I think about like different web components and isolated code, perfect. Yeah, I don't know. So like, here's the getting started page, but here's a Storybook, like sort of, you're able to see different you're able to see different components in isolation and see how they're rendered. So like, if I want to see like a speedometer, and then you could have, this isn't a great example, but
components.
oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, perfect. Oh, here we go. So like Facebook, perfect. Yeah, thank you. So like you could see different buttons, different variants, etc. And then you can also have different states of like switching variables down here to see different ways that you would use it. So like if I wanted to switch it from like miles per hour to kilometers, you could do that, see that, and the interactivity, and then also see different code examples, etc. So like, how on earth do I actually put this button in my about page? Well, there's the code, there's how you use it. So that's how I would describe Storybook off the cuff, if you will. So
Oh, I didn't realize how agnostic it is. Yeah, that one is not using React or anything. It's just Vader's CSS class, right? So, yeah.
You can just React components, like very complex components that are just a small part of the overall page.
you could do both, yes. So like that and Storybook, like I would do that like in isolation to make sure that it works right. And then if you have an end-to-end workflow of like do everything right. So like if we think of an Amazon workflow of like add something to our cart, change the number, etc. And then now our new thing is apply a gift card, right? Or apply a third-party gift card. Maybe you test that third-party gift card module in its own Storybook, but then you would do an end-to-end test of like, okay, well, like, is my integration between adding it to the cart, getting the total, and then getting the discount, and then still being able to buy. That's a separate workflow. So that you might do end to end. The other one that you might just do the gift card application isolated in its own Storybook if your team's only working on that one component, if you will. And like, think about it, that gift card could like, that same gift card component could also be used in AWS to like, you could use Amazon gift cards to maybe make your AWS bill a little bit cheaper, if you will.
So when you say connect them, do you mean that you just point Playwright or point Storybook?
Yes, yeah, yes. Yeah, exactly. Like that first URL would be wherever you're running your Storybook, ideally locally. And the thing that I don't know is sort of in regards to the weirdness of to get like the Istanbul code coverage. I think the way in which you do that, you have to use some ways that people might be doing it with Jest is with V8, but I think in order to do it with Playwright, you have to use Babel. I don't know if like there's any weirdness in that workflow to get the code coverage to see which lines of JavaScript it touches. But like if you're just going to do the test and you don't care about the code coverage, it's as I would say, if you will. Couple other things. So I'm going to show you locators. This is a cool thing that Playwright maintains. And it's maybe it's not as funny. There's a Microsoft example of different Playwright tests, which I'll show you. One of their key, they had like an e-commerce website that's been down for 8 months, so none of those tests work, and it's been reported. So That's why you'll notice those breaking, if you will. And I couldn't find a reference to host that code locally, but this is a really simple website if you want to play around and like test doing different tests that Playwright maintains that is still up to do different tests. One thing to keep in mind too is like, as I said, in parallel, there's going to be things that you're going to want to do before multiple tests. So you would put those in a before each, and then sort of do that there, if you will. And I just want to show some of the locators. So like with the locators, and let's make this a little bit bigger. Okay, yeah. So with the locators, you could sort of like get by different roles to find different things on your page, if you will. So if we take a look at that, sort of like, all right, well, this is a checkbox, find the checkbox, etc. Find a button, a heading, etc. And you know, finding different text, labels, titles. And then this is one that I would use caution with, but mind you, I'm not a testing expert, so maybe this caution is malformed. Take this with a grain of salt, but like a theory that I've heard is like, if you can orchestrate your tests in the way in which a user would visually be able to see it, do that first. So like, for example, like test ID or CSS selectors, a user's not going to really open up the dev tools and see like what a CSS selector is or a test ID to click on different things. So if you're able to orchestrate the test in a different way, the way that a user actually finds the button, etc., that might be closer to the way a user actually interacts with your page. I'm sure there's absolutely downsides to that. Yeah.
This ID.
Yeah.
Trying to test.
Yeah. So for example, like where I could see you use this is like, if you have a chessboard, right? Like how are you going to tell all of the white cells, the white and black cells, where the pieces can move? You'd probably put a data test ID of like B1, B2, or you could count through it, etc. That's where it would probably make sense to use a data test ID. But if you have a button that says like log out, you'd probably want to like search by the text name of log out, unless log out is in 4 different places. Then you'd want to say, okay, look for the button, not the link of log out, etc. Yeah. And yeah, so now let me show some examples in VS Code. So yeah, let's get there. So this is the one that I sort of showed initially, and you could see like initially we're just sort of going to Chrome, or no, we're just going to Google. We're going to search for a different label, and then once we fill that text in there, we'll sort of have the keyboard and we'll press the enter button. And what's neat is as this runs too, there's this plugin for VS Code, which I highly suggest. It'll install the different hooks for the different browsers. So when you run, you can run against the different browsers. I have not tried WebKit.
Use that extension.
Yeah, that's a great question. If you search Playwright, it is the biggest, well, it is the most popular one with 1 million views. Let's double check. I believe it is, but if so, it would be a shame if someone else got the name. Playwright test for VS Code. It has like 1 million downloads. So, great question. And like that other one, I don't even know what that other one does. It looks like it's by Microsoft too. So yeah, and so like I haven't even tried it for WebKit, but let's see. So technically this should load Safari and Chrome and do this test, but you know what? We're not going to see anything because I didn't show the browser. So that's headless mode. We'll see sort of this, and it should open up 2 browsers and just blaze through, if you will. So yeah, that's sort of it going through. Now, think about this. If we had a failed test, and you could see that that was Chrome and I guess this is Safari. I have no clue what this is. That's Safari. Okay, thanks. Oh yeah, and I guess the buttons would have yielded that. So now let's say you had an issue of like, okay, this test failed, and let's find a test. This is a better test, or actually here, we'll do this one here. So if I go to this one, yeah, we'll go to this one. If we want to sort of debug it, what you can do is show this trace viewer, which I think is pretty useful, especially when you're looking at like failed tests or seeing why it's going to fail. And not 100% sure why that's not. Oh, you know what? Okay. Hold on, let me just run this again with the browser. And there is auto timeout. So like by default, it's 30 seconds. If you have something that needs to go longer than 30 seconds, I'd probably think about re-architecting my test to not have a pause in there. But it's kind of annoying with the fact that that it needs to wait 30 seconds for it to fail when like you miss something. So like here's a test that I was doing to like look for a pair, like close the 15% off from Evo gear and then look for a certain pair of skis or ski boots, I think I did in there, and then see that. The neat thing about the trace viewer, and I'll show it on this other one, is you'll be able to sort of see you'll be able to see what happened at different times and sort of what your network requests were, what the different selectors on the page was, et cetera, to sort of see why it failed. Because, you know, unfortunately, sometimes when these tests break, it's not a function of something wrong in your front end code. It could just be a brittle test, if you will. So for some reason, that's being a little bit weird. Let me just see. I think something's. And it might, yeah, okay, yeah, here we go. So neat. So this, if we look at this, neat, it'll go. So like you can sort of see, so this is great, especially like think about this, and this will happen even if you're in headless mode. So if you have 1,000 tests go in CI/CD in the middle of the night, the ones that failed, you could go into here and see sort of the trace viewer and see, okay, like what's happening over time. So if I look, let's see, right about here, so like here it's going through, it clicks, it selects, so it's waiting for, notice how it's waiting for the selector, it's waiting for there, it's in there, and then we sort of see the images, and then it's looking for the first image, if you will. And then you can see the different events and then all of the network requests. So like even after the fact, like you don't need to have the live window open, you don't need to SSH into a machine. This sort of trace debugger has all of that. So you could sort of, you know, click through here and see like, oh, wait a second, we were supposed to have a request header there. So of course it's not going to get the images back because I didn't have my, you know, Gmail request header or something of that sort. So really, I think a powerful thing in regards to troubleshooting broken tests. Mind you, right now, in my day-to-day, we don't have a ton of Playwright tests, so we're not really troubleshooting a ton of broken ones. So time will tell how awesome this actually is. And then I'm going to show another test here. And that part? Oh, neat. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, and I've only saw a hour talk on Cypress, so I can't really compare a ton to Cypress. So these are the Microsoft examples. Now, mind you, anything with the numbers are ones that I just made, and I'll show you how to sort of make this from VS Code, which is pretty neat in regards to the selectors. But if we just take a look at another example, so this is sort of a clock, and this clock, I think I should have it open somewhere. But if we look at it, it's just a basic clock that has like a 5-minute countdown, if you will. And that is the website that they maintain to show this example. And we can sort of see, okay, like we go to the page, we see that the clock, and we'll set the clock, you sort of pass it in there. And you can set the date, if you will, and then we expect that to have the date that we just set, if you will. And then going forward, you can sort of take the clock, change the time, and then if we're going to fast forward it by 30 minutes, we would expect it to have the time of 10:30, etc. And then likewise with the expectations of like, okay, would you want you know, that offer expired after 5 minutes? If we fast forward at 5 minutes, it'll count down, etc. Right? You don't want it to wait and sit there for 500,000 milliseconds or whatever 5 minutes would be, and now it would be factor of 6, maybe 60,000 milliseconds. You wouldn't want to do that. So passing in the page, fast forwarding the clock, it should be expired. And then you'd expect to see that, if you will. And you could also sort of see like, okay, if there was the opposite, to not be visible, etc. So now here's a test that I was making that was a little bit flaky before, and let's see if I actually fixed it. But I want to show you how I made this test too. So let's sort of do that. So if I go to the Playwright extension, if you will, you can sort of do this. You can record a new test. So if I go to I'm going to do a fantasy football example. So like if I want to go to Fantasy Pros, and then I sort of want to say, okay, what defenses are going to be the absolute worst? Because I'm going to pick players who face the worst defenses. And then I want to click on this, get by this text. Everything that I was doing to facilitate that, and there's, yeah, let me just start there. Everything that I was doing to facilitate that, it's going to record it for you so you can help to see that. This I think is pretty neat. I really need to I'm really fortunate to have an awesome automation engineer who's like an expert in Selenium. I need to understand like what Selenium's version of this is, but like I've never seen anything like this before in regards to end-to-end testing, and this makes life so much easier. Like, hey, don't like, and especially with like weird things like Google Images, you have all the images. We'll like search for image and then do the first, do the second, or do the nth image, etc. And weird things. This is really helpful in my opinion. Something that they added within the last 6 months, this wasn't always a feature, is, and let's see if I could find that window that I just had open. Oh yeah, Playwright. So this, they also, and now what everybody wanted is they were like, all right, that's neat, but like, how do I do the assertions? And you still have to figure out like, okay, I want to see like whatever this thing is, get text by a car, like get text by car, for Carolina, and then to be visible. Well, instead, they just added this like less than 6 months ago, sort of assert value and assert text. So if I want to assert the text and see like, how would I figure this out? Like this Carolina Panthers, assert that the element contains the text. Yeah, this. And then let's see what it gave me over there. So this is, this might be a little bit less fragile or more fragile, the assertion helpers, because those were just added in the last 6 months. And then it's like, okay, you would expect this to contain that text. So it'll even help you out with some of that, with those. Mind you, as you get fluent, you won't really need that. But when you're like, wait, how on earth do I do this? It's not working. Pretty good tool to help the onboarding of Playwright, in my opinion. And yeah, one that I was doing before was the following test, and I'll sort of here, I'm going to close this one. And that would be this one. And I don't, I'm gonna show it in the browser. And it's, I swear an hour and a half ago, this test passed. But this is a perfect example of a flaky test. I don't really know why it's flaky, which is even better. So if we look at this and let's actually see if it passes. Oh, and I do actually kind of know why it's flaky, if you will. So number 5, and part of it is due to the size of the window, and for some reason I can't seem to get, hold on, show.
In your elements, you need to scroll down to get to your element.
No, oh yes, that's exactly it. And like, here, if I just run it there. Okay, so like it goes on this page and I was able to like cheat, but like it didn't behave like I thought. So like it closes this out, I think. And this is fun. Maybe it's not working now. This was working.
Oh, you can step in, it's right there.
You can, yeah. You can in headed mode. But like it's gonna fail because it's not exactly what it expects to be. But sort of I went in, I sort of and it'll see like, hey, look, it timed out on going to that page, but that's not the thing. So I think that the takeaway here was that this was very weird. Initially I was trying to make sure that this was truthy, like I selected the right size boots, if you will, with that test. but like sometimes it was false there. And like part of that was like, okay, like this locator, this page locator, technically it should await. There is a thing to make sure like, rather than is checked, it's like wait for it to be rendered, wait for it to be visible. I don't know why it was weird. And I think I'm actually confusing two tests, if you will. Maybe it was this other one. I did use the debug a little bit for that one, but see, the problem is like, and I don't understand why this is the case. So like, if I sort of run this on the debug, due to Black Friday and like the ski season starting, Evo's constantly changing their page. I don't understand why the size affects the fragility of the different tests. So like, sort of, if I look at the viewer and then run it with this, you'll kind of see it go in and then in the debug. And like for now, like, and I have no idea why an hour and a half ago was working fine, but it's failing on Xing out that 15% offer. Now, like maybe it's like different cookies, different IP location, but like it's the same physical size, if you will. But for some reason it does not appear to be behaving now. And like part of that was like sort of this, like, is it checked? That's fine. But sometimes you have to do an implicit, like, wait for this to be visible because like its natural thing doesn't, its natural await doesn't always work the way you would expect it to. And honestly, yeah, this one's just being kind of a pain, if you will, because it won't even go to the first, it won't even go to evo.com. Maybe I lost my internet connectivity, but it used to fail a lot further along, so I'm not sure why it's not behaving right now. But in that regard, I think that's everything that I intended to show, and we can sort of go to the conclusion. Yeah, so key takeaways is seems like a pretty robust way to do like integration or end-to-end tests for, you know, web applications. You can support most browsers, and, you know, breaking up things in isolation might be a more effective way to sort of go about if you don't need the full end-to-end tests, depending on what you're trying to test. Any questions?
Playwright was a fork off of Puppeteer, right?
I believe so, right? Like, I don't know if they just continued Puppeteer and changed the name, or if they actually forked it and said, you know, this is now Playwright, right? Like, and I don't know if, I'm pretty sure Puppeteer died, so I don't know if that the original Puppeteer just died or if they continued working on it, if you will, and it's now called Playwright.
Well, I was gonna ask what the motivation might have been for that, or like what additional features made it add, but sounds like it's died or might.
I would being having never maintained an open source project myself and not having interest in doing so due to the time, I wouldn't be surprised if it was like just sort of the time someone else had funding and someone else was willing to do it, and they're like, hey, rather than like keep waiting for one or two people to accept these pull requests, let's just take it ourselves, fork it, and then we'll motor through, especially if you have like the backing of a FANG company and you have a bunch of developers on it.
I think another big factor was that Puppeteer wasn't focused on testing.
Okay.
They had been,
Yeah, the automation. Yeah.
and everything with the API of the Playwright is just focused on testing.
And if you think about the name too, right? Like Puppeteer, Puppet, Playwright, similar. So like even the names are similar. So that's how you can kind of see the roots there. Okay, gotcha. So then it is a fork. Yeah. Yeah.
You can, simple scripting that you did in VS Code, you can do that to your script.
Oh, neat.
Or
Okay.
you can click stuff.
Actually, yeah, so it's still around.
Right now I have to check out two feet.
Yeah.
No, I'll stay with Playwright.
Playwright is a pro feature testing. It has those three browsers that use this to test it. There's a stripped down Chromium, stripped down Firefox, and stripped down Backend. It lets you just remove those independently and use them last I checked, that is flat out the only way to run a web browser on Windows.
Oh, interesting. Oh, wow, okay, I didn't even realize that that was possible. I would have like did something weird with like a VM or something. Awesome.
I researched that pretty thoroughly, VM stuff, but if you don't want to mess around with that, which is technically illegal to mess around with.
Gotcha.
But Playwright is the only way, it just has to your web projects in WebKit, in part of the which you can see.
Neat, okay.
It's super easy. You just tell it to launch project WebKit and then you just go to whatever page and just await page.pods or something. And it just hits.
Nice.
You just WebKit on Windows.
You
Okay.
can do that, but you can directly open the WebKit browser. Oh, okay. Oh, you don't have to write any code.
Wow.
You can also get a previous version of some of these browsers, including WebKit, just by installing the versions of Playwright.
There we go. That's why we do it. Awesome.
Supporting older web, some websites that aren't componentized, like using Razor or whatever.
Ooh, fun. I think you'd be fine. In theory, you would be fine. Because like think about these, right? Like I'm looking for a button, I'm looking for a link. It's still HTML. Like I'll be able to find different things. I've fortunately never made a WPF app or like WinForms app. So like I think you're out of luck if it's not browser based. But now, yeah, no, well, like Razor's browser based, right? But like WinForms, like a Windows, like a non-browser based thing, you'd be out of luck. I think you'll be fine in the most recent version of like Chrome, Firefox. Now, mind you, like if you made something in Razor, I wouldn't be surprised if certain applications in Razor have to support back to IE 9, IE 8. Then you're out of luck. You have to probably want to look into Selenium. And that's initially what like in the DoD space, we do have legacy browser support. Unfortunately, we always will. So that's why we use Selenium for like certain end-to-end testing because going back to like Firefox 76, to my knowledge, you're not going to do it in Playwright.
They just accepted the job today. Kind of work with dependency.
Gotcha. No. Thanks everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.